The valley looked quiet enough to swallow sound. A small seal element moved in a staggered file, boots grinding on crusted snow, each step crunching through the thin ice that had formed overnight. Breath steamed out of balaclavas and disappeared into the brittle air. Above them, ridges curved into a horseshoe of rock and ice, dark teeth biting at a burning white sky. Sunlight bounced hard off the snow, turning every eye into a slit behind tinted lenses. 2 minutes to choke point, the chief murmured, voice low but calm. They didn't bother answering over the radio. At this range, in this silence, their own breath sounded loud enough. The point man, Rios, moved ahead of the others by a few body lengths, rifle tucked tight, scanning the narrow valley. The snow there was flatter, smoother, years of wind having shaved it into a natural corridor. Tracks behind the team showed a broken line of dark prints. Ahead of them, the world was untouched. The crack came before the team even understood it was a shot. It peeled apart just above Rio's shoulder. There was no warning whine, no visible flash on the ridges. 1 second he was stepping forward, the next his body jerked as if yanked by an invisible wire. His rifle dropped from his hands. He pitched face first into the snow, leaving a short, shocked exhale behind him. "Contact!" someone shouted. The second round hit before the last syllable finished. Another crack, smaller, sharper, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere inside the valley walls. The bullet caught the man behind Rios in the gap between his shoulder plates, flattening him into the crusted snow with a grunt that ended too quickly. "Down, down, down," the chief roared. They moved on instinct, battle drills slamming into place. Men dove toward the nearest rocks, slid behind knee-high snow berms, dropped into shallow depressions that felt woefully thin. A third shot came, perfectly spaced from the second. A helmet snapped back, the round entering just above the rim, carving through the gap where no armor could reach. Any motion above knee height drew fire. "Where?" The junior officer, Mason, called out, pressing himself against a half-buried boulder. His voice came out higher than usual, adrenaline pressing his throat. "Can't see," someone answered. "No muzzle." The chief keyed his radio. Viper 1 to Overwatch, troops in contact, grid. Static tore across the net, a harsh grinding that made him wince even through his headset. He tried again, switching to another channel, then another. All of it was the same. White noise, a wall of sound that ate words before they formed. "Comms are trash," the comms man shouted from behind a jagged rock. "Gee's good. It's external. We're being blanketed." The chief's stomach tightened. "A jammer. Out here." They crawled, slid, and dragged themselves toward what passed for cover. Scattered rocks protruded through the snow, most barely large enough for a single body. The valley floor narrowed here, funneled between steep slopes on 3 sides. Up top, the ridgelines converged into a bowl, giving anyone holding them a perfect view down into the corridor. A classic kill zone, and they'd walked right into the center of it. Holt, the corpsman, didn't hesitate. He shoved his pack ahead of him and low-crawled toward Rios, unbothered by the way rounds snapped overhead. His gloved hands dug into the snow, pulling himself forward inch by inch. When he reached the fallen point man, he rolled him just enough to see the wound, dark blossoms spreading across the chest plate where the round had punched through the side gap. "Got one." Holt yelled, voice tight. "Is still with us." He hooked his arm under Rios' vest and began dragging him back, boots churning trenches into the snow. Another shot cracked. The bullet tore through Holt's pack, shredding medical gear. Gauze and bandage wrappers exploded into the air, fluttering down in slow motion like confetti against the white. "Ranges are dialed," someone muttered. Everyone heard it. The chief pressed his shoulder harder into the rock, glanced at his watch. Time was a hard, unforgiving number on his wrist. Their extraction bird was scheduled to touch down on a ridge landing zone in under 40 minutes. This valley was a bottleneck between here and there. Every minute pinned here bled straight out of that window. "Angles," he shouted. "Anyone got an angle?" Mason risked a quick peek over the rock, just enough to show his goggles. A round struck the stone an inch from his forehead, throwing splinters of rock and ice into his face. He dropped back, blinking blood out of the corner of his eye. "Multiple rifles," called one of the rear men. Shots coming in staggered. Different heights. At least 3 positions, maybe more. A round hit high on the cliff behind them, biting into the rock and showering them with ice chips. The wind, which had been howling steadily through the valley all morning, suddenly died, leaving the air painfully clear. The world snapped into sharp, cruel focus. The ridgelines etched in blue-black rock, the bright snow field, the dark spots where their teammates lay unmoving. "That's not random fire," Mason said, breathing hard. "They are walking us, every time we move." The shots were too clean, no wasted rounds, no wild sprays. Whoever was up there wasn't interested in intimidation. They were quietly, methodically tearing the patrol apart. The chief keyed his radio again and got nothing but that same flattened roar. No rescue, no overwatch. They were alone in a valley that belonged to someone else. "On me," he shouted, signaling with a sharp hand cut. We collapsed closer, smaller footprint. Make them work for angles. The team bunched up behind the largest rocks, closing the gaps between them. Holt slid in with Rios, immediately going to work, his hands moving in practice motions even as rounds walked closer to their position. Another shot cracked. Someone grunted. A rifle clattered out of numbed fingers. "We don't move, they kill us here," Mason hissed. "We move, they kill us in the open." The chief didn't answer. He stared at the ridges instead, jaw clenched, trying to find the shimmer of glass, the outline of a rifle barrel, any sign of the shooters in the maze of rock and snow. Nothing. Just empty stone and a faint haze of powder drifting on the still air. The next volley was coming. You could feel it, the way the valley held its breath, the way the silence seemed to narrow around them. One by one, the men tucked in tighter, as if trying to fold themselves into the rock. Then, from somewhere far beyond the ridges, a different sound cut through the cold. It was still a rifle shot, still the sharp crack of powder igniting and metal flexing. But the cadence was off, slightly longer report, slightly deeper tone, echoing from a different direction than the killing shots pinning them. It snapped across the valley and rolled back a beat later. Half a heartbeat after that, one of the hostile rifles went silent midstream. There was no scream, no dramatic tumble. One moment, rounds were slamming into the rocks around them. The next, one of those angles vanished as if someone had reached up and plucked it off the ridge. The SEALs froze. Who fired that? Mason hissed, looking left and right. No one answered. No one had. You could tell by their faces. Even in the chaos, each man knew the sound of his own rifle, the rhythm of his teammates. This would be none of them. Another crack. Same distant direction. Same calm cadence. A second enemy firing point died. The shots that had been coming from the far left ridge simply stopped, leaving a hole in the latticework of killing angles. "Overwatch," someone whispered. "Can't be," the comms man said. "Radio's still dead." Nobody got that call. A third shot, somewhere high on the right. A speck of snow puffed into the air. Then a dark shape slumped out of sight behind a rock. The valley felt oddly quiet in the aftermath. Not silent. The wind was returning in thin, wandering gusts. But there was a different texture to the stillness now. The previous confidence, that clinical rhythm of incoming fire, had fractured. "Check those sectors," the chief ordered, barely above a whisper now. "See if anyone still has glass on us." One of the men dared another quick look over the rock, just high enough to sweep the ridges. For a fraction of a second, he saw her, a small, prone figure near the jagged crest of a side ridge, wrapped in snow camo so close to the surrounding rock that she almost wasn't there at all. Rifle braced, head steady behind the scope, body still in a way that looked almost inhuman. The wind tugged at the cloth around her shoulders, and then a gust of powder blew across the ridge, and she was gone again. "Chief," the spotter breathed. "We got someone up there." "Friend or foe?" Mason asked. "Depends which way she keeps firing," the chief said. He didn't sound sure. A fourth shot boomed from that distant perch. Somewhere on the far ridge, another enemy rifle went quiet. In that frozen, Lethal Valley, pinned down and half-blind. The team understood only one thing with certainty. Whatever this sniper net was, however unstoppable it was supposed to be, something, or someone, had just started breaking it apart from the outside. And she was doing it without orders, without comms, and without them even knowing her name. Hours earlier, the world had been cold but far simpler. Canvas walls rattled with every gust, the wind clawing at seams and stitching. Inside the tent, a map board sat propped on a folding table, corners weighted with ammo cans and gloves. A small heater glowed in the center of the space, making the air directly around it almost too warm, while the corners stayed icy. The platoon crowded in, shoulders brushing, gear creaking softly as they leaned over the map. Above them, light filtered through the tent roof, turning everything a muted, dusty gold. "All right, listen up," Mason said, tapping a gloved finger against the valley printed in faded color. "Task is simple. We escort the tech. We hit the ground sensor cluster here, pull the data, verify it's intact, and we get off that ridge before the weather pushes in." The tech specialist, Alvarez, clutched a ruggedized case against his chest as if someone might snatch it. His glasses were fogged around the edges. Sensor clusters tracking radio patterns and movement through the corridor, Mason continued. "Command says if that data gets grabbed, they can reverse engineer our patrol routes, response times, and air patterns. We don't let that happen." The chief stood at Mason's shoulder, arms folded, eyes flicking between the map and his men. He didn't need the terrain picture. He'd already memorized it. He was watching reactions instead, the little shifts in posture, the way jokes died off when weather and timing came up. "Pickup window is hard," Mason said, tapping a red X on a ridge. "Bird hits this landing zone at 1400. There's a front rolling in after that. Heavy snow, low visibility. If we're not there on time, we're staying on the ground until it clears. So don't miss the bus," someone muttered. A low ripple of laughter spread, more habit than humor. In the far corner, half shaded by the tent wall, the designated marksman knelt beside her rifle, listening as she worked. Call sign, Raven. Rank just under the chief. She'd been flown in from another team to plug a gap on this patrol, an extra rifle that wasn't on the original roster. She didn't crowd the table. Instead, she studied the map from a slight distance, eyes tracing contour lines and shading. Her gloved finger followed the printed valley, then drifted upward to the ridge lines flanking it. The ice blue of the riverbed, the hashed lines of elevation, the small notation of a sensor cluster on a spur, they all fit together in her head like pieces of a slow, grinding puzzle. "Routes tight," the chief said quietly to her when the others drifted away to check gear. "We've got maybe 10 minutes of slack built into the movement, no more." She nodded. "Valley's a funnel." He inclined his head. "We'll keep moving. Won't sit still in there." Near the table, one of the younger guys, Cooper, glanced over at her, then back at Mason. "So, no offense, but why do we need a long gun on this? Feels like we're already heavy." Mason shrugged. "Hire wanted extra reach. We're not arguing with free insurance." "Extra weight. More like," Cooper muttered, just loud enough for the nearest few to hear. "We already got enough guns." The line got a few chuckles. Raven didn't look up. She moved the bolt on her rifle, feeling the smooth travel, the subtle scrape where cold metal kissed colder metal. The sound soothed her more than any reassurance could have. She worked her checklist in silence. Suppressor, seated, locked. Rounds, counted, checked for deformities, stacked in magazines with the tips all pointing exactly the same way. Range card, updated for this altitude, this likely temperature, this humidity. Spare batteries, fresh, stowed in a pocket where her body heat would keep them from dying too fast. An old fixed sight sat wrapped in cloth near the bottom of her pack, a relic from another time, heavy and simple. Her fingers brushed something else in that pack. Cloth, worn soft with handling. She pulled it out for a heartbeat, a small patch, edges frayed, ink slightly faded. A date, a call sign. Faces flickered behind her eyes. A different valley, a different snowfield, a team that hadn't made it out. She folded the patch back into its place, tucking it deep behind the extra socks and spare gloves. Quiet fuel. Not for display. Never for display. On the map, her eyes tracked upward from the valley floor to a side ridge on the east side. A row of jagged symbols marked broken rock there, like crooked teeth. She stepped closer, tapped that section. This line, she said. Mason glanced over. Yeah. Natural perch, she said. Broken basalt. Multiple sight lines into the valley. If someone wants to watch or control that corridor, that's where they sit. We could use it for overwatch, too. Gets us angle on any high ground shooters. The chief leaned in, considering. What's the time penalty to climb that ridge and rejoin the route? 30 minutes, maybe 40, depending on crust, she said. We'd want to move slow near the crest. Mason checked his watch as if the time would appear there again. We don't have 40 minutes, he said. Weather doesn't care if we like the view. It's still useful to know, she said. If someone's watching, they'll be up there or across from it. We should expect glass on us in the funnel. Noted, Mason said. He wasn't dismissive, just juggling too many variables. We'll keep moving. If we get hit, we adjust. She nodded once. It wasn't her mission to win arguments. It was her mission to be ready when people lost them. During final radio checks, she listened more than she spoke. Mason exchanged status with Haya, the comms man switching through frequencies, PRC pressed snug against his chest. Under the usual hiss of static, she heard something off, a pattern, a faint irregular hum that didn't belong. It came and went, like someone testing keys on a piano in the apartment below. What's that? She asked the comms man. He frowned, tilted his head as if ears could sharpen what electronics reported. Probably just local noise, he said, but he logged it, too. You could tell by the way his hand hovered just a second longer over the dial. Outside, the world was all white slopes and black rock. The valley mouth lay ahead, a narrowing slice of pale brightness framed by gray cliffs. Raven lifted binoculars, scanning the approaches. Subtle things were wrong. Snow that should have been pristine showed faint smoothing, like someone had brushed away deeper prints and left only a uniform crust. A glint flashed once on a rock above the valley entrance, then vanished. Over one section of bare stone, a raven circled lazily, cawing now and then, a dark slash against the sky. She tracked the bird with her eyes for a moment, feeling the breeze on her cheek. It was coming off the ridge at an angle, carrying sound and scent down into the valley. At midday, the sun would sit behind the main crest, backlighting anyone up there, turning them into silhouettes if you knew where to look. She filed that away, another quiet line on a mental card already crowded with notes. On the move, she took position slightly off the main file, walking just outside the neat column. While most eyes scanned the valley floor and mid-slopes, haze drifted higher, skimming over ridge notches and rock shadows. Twice, the chief gestured for her to tighten up, to stay closer. Can't cover you if you're too far off, he murmured as she drew even. You will if I'm where I'm useful, she answered, equally quiet. He gave her a look but didn't argue. Chiefs didn't survive as long as he had by ignoring the instincts of people who'd lived on glass and cross haze. As they reached the throat of the valley, the breeze shifted slightly. She turned her face into it, feeling the faint sting of ice in the air. Up on the crest, the sun was beginning its arc, sliding toward the angle that would silhouette anyone careless enough to move wrong. She glanced up, saw nothing but rock and sky, and kept walking anyway. Minutes later, the valley sprang its trap. The memory of the first shots blended with the present. The point man down, the second and third impacts, the scramble to cover, all of it washed across her again as she pressed herself against the rough stone in the kill zone. Snow stung her cheeks where shards had cut through her balaclava. Emergency smoke had done nothing. The purple cloud had billowed, hung in the air for a moment, then thinned into almost nothing under the weak wind. Rounds had carved right through it, precise as if the fog wasn't even there. Mortar, someone yelled as a distant thump echoed off the ridges. A heartbeat later, a small round dropped into the valley ahead of them and detonated with a dull whomp, throwing snow and shrapnel sideways instead of directly onto the patrol. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to hurt. The exits, Raven muttered. They are bracketing our routes. She flattened behind her rock and lifted her rifle just enough to peer through the optic. The glass framed a slice of ridge, a patch of stone and snow that any other eye would have dismissed. She waited, counting her breath, watching for nothing in particular. A tiny movement broke the pattern. A strip of cloth, twitching the wrong way against the wind, tucked into a notch in the rock. A microslide of snow collapsing in a spot where there had been no gust. A faint, darkened groove where repeated movement had polished stone. Sniper hide. Elevated, well camouflaged, with a perfect downward angle. She shifted the scope a few degrees. Tiny puffs appeared on another section of the cliff. Dust and snow kicked up just after each incoming round struck near the team. Exit points, showing where the rounds were leaving the rock face after near misses. She traced the line backward, mentally, to where those rounds must have come from. Another hide, offset from the first, overlapping arcs. They weren't fighting a lone shooter. They were inside a shape net, sniper pairs, spotters, maybe a small command node, all working together. The gaps in their fire were deliberate, creating false safe zones only to punish anyone who tested them. Another teammate cried out as a bullet grazed his side while he tried to help Holt drag the wounded deeper into cover. Blood dotted the snow. Holt's hands moved faster, tourniquets biting into limbs, bandages pressed into wounds. He had finite everything in his pack, and every hole punched through it by enemy rounds took something irreplaceable. Raven watched the mortar rounds land at the fringes of the valley, so how they formed a rough arc around the patrol's possible exits. Not close enough to obliterate, but close enough to threaten. Bracket the escape routes. Box them in. Clockwork, she thought. They've done this before. She slid back down behind the rock and shouted toward the chief. This isn't harassment, she said. It's a system. Sniper pays, overlapping sectors. Mortar and jamming in the same loop. They plan to pin and bleed us, then push in. You got eyes on the shooters, the chief called back. 3 positions, minimum, she replied. Maybe a command element tying the rhythm together. If we stay in the valley, they finish us, hey. Suggestions? The chief asked. He wasn't humoring her. He wanted anything that wasn't slow death. She jerked her chin toward the east ridge. Side ridge with broken rock. If I can get up there, I can see into their hides. Take the spotters, the mortar crew, maybe the jammer. Break their net. Mason's head snapped toward her. That ridge? We'd lose you for at least 15, 20 minutes just on the climb. You'd be exposed the whole way. You might not even make it, and if you do, you're out there alone with no comms. Staying here is a guarantee, she said. Me climbing is a maybe. I like maybe better. Another mortar round dropped closer, showering them with slush and fragments. The valley seemed to shrink around them. The men pressed tighter against their rocks, eyes going flicker-fast between each other and the ridges. The chief looked at them, at the wounded, at the medic working with hands that were already beginning to shake from cold and adrenaline, at the way the younger men's jokes had died away into tight-lipped silence. He thought about the map, about the comment earlier that morning about extra weight, about the patch he'd seen Raven tuck away when she thought no one was looking. We don't split under fire unless we have to, Mason said under his breath. Doctrine's not for decoration, Chief. The chief didn't answer him directly. He looked at Raven instead. You're sure that ridge gives you what you need? She nodded once. I saw the geometry this morning. It's the only spot that sees into the angles they're using. From here, we're blind. If you go and get cut off, we can't come drag you back, the chief said. I know. If you go and fail, he glanced at Holt, at Rios, at the rest. We all pay for it. I know that too, she said quietly. But I've watched a team die in a valley like this, with nobody on the flank. Never again if I can help it. He studied her for a long, thin second. Then he nodded. Go, he said. Ridge route. We'll give you what distraction we can. There was no flair to it, no swelling music, no tabletop speech. Just a quiet decision between two people who both understood the weight of it. Raven didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything at all. She tightened the strap on her helmet, checked her rifle sling, and waited. The lull between volleys came. A brief, aching pause where no rounds fell and the valley sounded almost normal. In that slice of almost peace, she moved. She broke from the cluster of bodies in a burst of low, explosive speed, boots punching through the crust, snow spraying behind her. Rounds snapped into the air around her immediately, the net reacting to the sudden target like a muscle fighting a burn. The team behind her made as much noise as they could. Smoke, this time tossed not as cover but as distraction, billowed in the up-valley wind. Controlled bursts of rifle fire cracked, aimed not to hit but to force the enemy to split focus, to make sensory overload where there had been surgical calm. Raven dove behind a jagged line of rocks at the valley edge, sliding into a shallow gully that cut up toward the side ridge. The gully was barely wide enough for her body and her pack. Snow filled it unevenly, hiding rocks that bruised ribs and hips every time she twisted around them. She hugged the dead ground, moving in fits and starts. Crawl, listen, crawl again. Once, a round bit into the snow just above her boots, throwing ice into her calves. She stifled the urge to scramble and instead pressed herself flatter, letting the world settle before inching forward again. Halfway up, she reached a break in the gully where she had to cross a more open patch. The wind funneled through there, whistling faintly, tugging at the loose fabric of her snow camo. She started to move and the world exploded 6 inches from her face. A round struck the rock beside her head, shattering stone. Fragments of rock and metal hammered into her optic housing, cracking the outer lens, gouging a sharp line across the body. She dropped flat, heart thudding, the taste of stone dust bitter in her mouth. She slid back into the gully, hands running over the rifle. The tube was intact. The action cycled smoothly. The optic lens, though, was spiderwebbed at one corner, the rest of the glass mottled with tiny chips. When she brought it up to her eye, her field of view was narrowed, edges warped, light catching on the damage in distracting flays. She sat there for 3 deep breaths, the world shrinking down to the small space between her gloved hands and the rifle. Then she pulled the optic off. From her pack, she unwrapped the old fixed sight she'd packed that morning because she always packed it, because she knew gear failed when you needed it most. It felt oddly heavy in her hands, an artifact from another time. She mounted it to the rifle, tightening the screws by feel. She'd lost her zoom, her fancy reticle, her ability to read the minutiae of a target's posture at long range. In exchange, she had a simple, rugged piece of glass that would not betray her when a gust of rock dust hit it. Above, the sky changed character. A thin snow squall slipped over the ridge, dragging veils of white across the open. It wasn't the full, choking whiteout the forecasters had warned about, but it was enough to make edges less crisp, to turn defined shadows into smudges. Visibility dipped and rose in irregular pulses as clouds crossed the sun. Sometimes the valley was a clean photograph. Sometimes it was blurry, indecisive. She used it. She timed her crossings to those moments when the world softened, when the enemy's optics would be fighting the same shifting light haze were. She moved low and slow, resisting every urge to sprint. Adrenaline begged her to go faster. Experience told her speed was what got you killed under glass. Below, the valley continued to suffer. Mortar rounds thudded against the snow. Closer now, but still not dead center. Men shouted. Holt cursed softly as he realized he'd lost some of the gear he'd packed that morning. The chief kept his voice level, calling out micro-adjustments. Shift left. Use that rock. You're too exposed. Get down. Holt, how's Rios? Raven heard one of the wounded groan, the sound carrying up the slope like something alive and desperate. It put a clock on her spine. From higher vantage points along the climb, she stole glances back into the valley. The geometry of the engagement revealed itself in pieces. Shallow tracks crusted over near rock overhangs. Tiny antenna masts poking just high enough to catch signal, hidden from the valley floor's view. A faint heat shimmer near a boulder cluster that looked otherwise unremarkable, the kind of distortion that came from electronic equipment chewing power in the cold. The jammer, she thought. Has to be. She worked her way toward the broken basalt teeth she'd pointed out in the brief. Up close, they were even better than the map had promised. Tall, narrow slabs of rock with gaps between them just wide enough for a rifle barrel and a focused eye. She found a shallow notch behind one of those slabs and slid into it, body fitting like she'd been carved there. She laid out her magazines in the snow before her, quick counting. Not infinite, not even close, but enough if she was careful and her heart didn't try to run off without her. She pulled out the folded map, checked ranges one more time, then built the target ladder in her mind. Jammer first, spotters next, mortar crew after that, remaining sniper hides. And somewhere in that maze, the command figure whose voice was timing the whole deadly rhythm. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to her small patch of stone, the cold stock against her cheek, the fixed sight circle of glass. She found the jammer by feel more than by sight. A squat box near that antenna mast, sheltered behind a boulder. Most of it was hidden, but one panel and a power cable sat exposed. Good enough. She waited for a lull in the enemy's fire. Not the end of a volley. Those were watched, but the subtle, half-second dead space between patterns. When it came, she pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked into her shoulder, a familiar push. The round punched through the panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then sparks flickered behind the boulder, and the cable jerked like a snake. Down in the valley, the chief's radio crackled once, twice, and then, like a blind eye struggling to open, it blinked into partial usefulness. "Viper, this is, say again, in contact." The voice was broken, chopped by residual interference, but it was a voice. It was enough. Raven didn't watch for celebration or confirmation. She shifted the rifle, hunting for a spotter she'd glimpsed earlier beside one of the hides. A figure crouched, glass up to his face, lips moving as he called wind and correction. She found him, barely a smear of shape against the stone. Between two gusts, when the snow veils parted, she sent a round. He collapsed sideways in a boneless fall, sliding down the rock until his leg caught on a small lip and left him hanging there. The paired sniper beside him hesitated, momentarily blind without constant correction. In the valley, the shift was almost physical. Mortars drifted wider as the loader lost his rhythm. Sniper volleys lost their perfect spacing by fractions of a second. It didn't make them safe. It made them human. "Raven, this is Viper 1. The chief's voice came through her earbud, cracked but present. "If that's you up there, keep doing whatever you're doing." "On it," she whispered, smiling despite herself. The enemy responded. A new noise entered the valley, a higher-pitched buzz, thin but insistent. A small quad drone lifted from behind a rocky outcrop on the far side. Rotors whining. It rose to just above ridge height and began to sweep, camera gimbal scanning. They were hunting her now. She pressed herself deeper into the rocks, letting the stone's cold bite through her gear. When the drone swung her way, she didn't move. Breath shallow, heart slow, she became another lump of snow, another jagged shadow. The drone passed overhead, lingered, then swung away, drawn by something else. She gave it a gift. Tilting her cracked optic just enough to catch a ray of sunlight, she flashed a small glint in the air above a different rock face, then quickly retracted it. To an operator staring at a screen somewhere, it would look like glass catching light. The drone drifted toward that false signal, curious, its camera tilting. While it chased the phantom, she slid to another firing slit, the snow whispering under her. She turned her attention to the mortar team. She could see them in glimpses when the gusts cooperated, a two-man crew beside a stubby tube, one loading, one adjusting angle. They were moving with mechanical repetition, like workers on an assembly line. She waited for the loader to reach for another round, his arm extending, shoulder exposed. She exhaled halfway, paused, and pressed the trigger. The first round took him high in the arm, snapping bone and spinning him away from the tube. The second, a beat later, slammed into the base of the mortar, bending metal and knocking it askew. From below, the dull thumps of outgoing rounds became hesitant, misaimed. Explosions wandered wide, throwing snow harmlessly into empty space. The chief felt it instantly. "They are losing it," he said, glancing at Mason. "We pushed to that outflow gully. Short bounds. Wounded move with carriers. No wide exposures. On your call, Mason answered, already signaling with his hand. The sniper net tried to snap back into control. Rounds began chipping at the basalt teeth around Raven's notch. Stone dust filled the air. Someone on the enemy side had found her general position and decided volume might succeed where precision had failed. A climber element started up a dark gully below her. She heard them before she saw them. The scrape of boots on rock, the muffled curses as they hit patches of ice. Their radio chatter drifted up in clipped phrases, angry and urgent. She didn't abandon her ladder. Instead, she used their ascent as part of the timing. While they focused on gaining elevation, she hunted for the command figure. He was harder to find. He didn't expose himself like the others. She caught glimpses, a glove hand reaching to adjust an antenna, a head bending over a map board laid on a rock, the glint of a headset's metal band. She scanned and waited. The fixed sight gave her a narrower window, but it was enough. Below, the chief ordered bounds to the gully. Teams moved in pairs, one covering, one running, boots tearing lines through the snow. Holt stayed glued to his patience, refusing to let go of Rio's harness even when rounds snapped close enough to pluck threads from his pack. Raven, this is Viper 1, came through the radio. We're moving. If you're dropping anything heavy on their end, now's the time. Working it, she said. The climbers reached the base of her position and started up, using handholds worn into the stone by countless freeze-thaw cycles. She could hear their breath now, ragged, echoing in the confined space of the gully. She shifted to a near-vertical angle, bracing her rifle against an overhang. From where she lay, she could see only the top of the gully mouth, a narrow opening where ice overhung stone. When the first helmet appeared, she put a round through the rock just beside it. Stone exploded inward. The climber screamed and fell, colliding with the man below him. Both tumbled back down the gully, slamming into the bottom in a tangle of limbs and gear. Flanks hot, someone shouted in a language he didn't speak but understood perfectly. Panic crackled through their net. She returned to the hunt for the commander. There, by a small rock wall, just tall enough to shield a crouching figure. The headset bobbed up briefly as he leaned to adjust a field antenna, mouth moving rapidly as he issued commands. She waited through 2 full cycles of his motion, counting the seconds between each lean. Wind came in gusts, rattling the cloth around her shoulders. Her fingers rested on the trigger, gentle, patient. On the third lean, she fired. The round struck just below his ear. He dropped mid-gesture, headset flying off his head and spinning in the snow. For a moment, no one moved. Then the entire enemy net wobbled. In the valley, incoming fire lost all coherence. Snipers fired late, or at the wrong places. Mortar attempts, what few came after that, landed wildly off mark. The sense of a hidden intelligence timing their suffering evaporated, leaving only individual shooters reacting in fear. Now, the chief barked. Move! The team surged toward the outflow gully, dragging the wounded, packs bouncing, lungs burning. Alvarez clutched the data drive as if it were his own heart. Holt kept one hand on Rio's, the other on his aid bag, teeth clenched hard enough to hurt. On the ridge, Raven checked her magazines. Not many rounds left. Enough for a handful of decisions. The drone, still searching, finally swung back toward her ridge. The operator, seeing collapsed figures in one gully and flashes from the basalt teeth, began to zero in. She used the cracked optic again, just long enough to flash one more glint, drawing the drone slightly off course. It moved to hover above an empty patch of rock while she slid to yet another firing slit. 2 more climbers tried their luck up a different approach, hoping to catch her from the side. She heard the faint clink of metal against stone, so the top of a rifle appeared at the edge of her vision. 2 shots, 2 bodies sliding down rock, shouts of fear following them. By now, the last hostile sniper understood what was happening. Leadership gone. Mortar crippled. Jammer dead. Climbers falling. He had 2 choices, stay in his hide and be hunted, or move to a backup position and try to cover a withdrawal. He chose to move. To get from his current hide to the fallback, he had to cross a narrow snow bridge between 2 rock faces. From the valley, it was invisible, a strip of white hidden under the crest. From most angles on the ridge, all you could see was blank snow. From Raven's notch, through a tiny stone window she'd picked out from the map hours earlier, it was a tight, perfect lane of fire. She shifted into position, the fixed sight framing the bridge like the only thing left in the world. The sniper stepped onto it, rifle slung for speed, head turning as he tried to watch too many angles at once. She waited until he was fully committed, no quick way back. Wind settled. The valley held its breath again, just like it had when the first round hit Rios. She pressed. The shot hit him in mid-stride. For a moment, his body seemed to hover, suspended between sides of the gap. Then gravity did what bullets had begun. He tumbled, arms and rifle spinning, disappearing down a chute of rock and ice. The impression of invincibility his team had enjoyed fell with him. Silence washed over the valley, different from before. Not the tense silence of a lurking predator, but the exhausted quiet that follows when something big finally stops moving. Raven lay there for a long heartbeat, cheek against cold stock, listening. No more mortar. No more coordinated sniper fire. Only distant shouts of retreat. Boots scraping on stone as survivors scrambled away from the kill zone they'd built for someone else. Viper 1, this is Raven, she said into her MIC, voice low, steady. Net's broken. You're clear to move along the gully and out. Minimal interference expected. Copy, Raven, the chief answered. His voice was rough, but there was something like awe in it. You just turned their trap inside out. Later, at the mountain airstrip, everything felt smaller. The hangar was just a big, echoing box of corrugated metal and concrete, but after the open valley it might as well have been the inside of a safe. Wind howled outside, slamming snow against the doors in sheets. Inside, stretchers lined one wall, bodies on them wrapped in blankets, 4 lines held in place with tape and stubbornness. Rios lay with his eyes half open, chest swaddled in gauze and plastic, machines clicking quietly beside him. The unit moved more slowly here, every action deliberate. There were no abrupt dives, no desperate lunges to cover. Instead, men made small trips between the coffee urn and the stretcher line, between the gear benches and the debrief corner, as if they were rebuilding their world one step at a time. On a folding table near the center, intelligence staff laid out captured gear. The ruined jammer, still emitting the occasional sullen spark. Scopes stripped from enemy rifles. A handheld device with a cracked screen and dented casing, its memory full of grid references and text. One analyst hit a key and frowned as lines of script scrolled by. They had preloaded messaging, he said. Not just coordinates. Scripts for recording captives. Talking points. They wanted to film a surrender. Broadcast it. Mason leaned on the table, jaw tight. Use our guys as an example, he said. Scare local partners. Show everyone what happens when you work with us. And with that sensor data, the analyst added, they'd know exactly when and where to hit future patrols. This corridor would be theirs, and anyone who tried to move through it would be walking into a replica of today. Alvarez, still clutching his ruggedized case like a talisman, nodded. Drive's intact, he said quietly. If she hadn't cooked that jammer when she did, would have been blind long enough for them to close in. That scenario on the device. That's not fantasy. That's a near-miss. In an after-action huddle, the chief stood in front of the group, cap pulled low, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and everything else. He didn't raise his voice much. He didn't need to. The hangar carried sound almost too well. We made mistakes, he said. We underestimated how prepared they were. We walked a route they knew we'd use. We ignored concerns we shouldn't have. His eyes went briefly to Raven standing at the edge of the semicircle, hands loosely clasped behind her back. Her recommendation on that side ridge was logged, but not prioritized, he continued. That's on me and on command pressure. When it came down to it, she moved alone, under fire, into higher danger so the rest of us could get out of lower danger. That wasn't in the plan. It should have been. She saved this patrol and the data we were carrying. He paused, then added, and she did it with a cracked optic, old-school glass, and fewer rounds than I'd want to see anyone take to a fight like that. There were no whistles, no cheers, just a shift in posture toward her, a subtle pivot of shoulders, a recalibration. The kind of acknowledgement that mattered more than noise. After the huddle broke, Cooper approached her gear bench. He stared at the battered rifle lying there, the cracked optics still mounted beside the fixed sight, both scarred from stone and battle. "I was wrong," he said, finally meeting her eyes. No jokes this time. No smirk. Just the words. She gave a small shrug. "You weren't the only one." He nodded and walked away, the moment small but real. Later, when the hangar had thinned out and most people had found somewhere to sit, she stood alone at the gear bench. She pulled the cloth patch from her pack and laid it beside the captured enemy handheld on the table. 2 stories sat side by side. One, in faded ink, was a date and a call sign from a mission that had ended in a valley like the one they'd just escaped. A sniper team wiped out by a net just as precise, just as confident. No ridge flanker, no one willing, or able, to climb into the angles the enemy didn't expect. The other, in cracked plastic and code, was a plan to repeat that story with different names. She looked at them until the past and present stopped feeling like 2 separate things and settled instead into a single, long line. A younger operator drifted over, hovering uncertainly. He was new enough that the creases in his gear hadn't fully settled yet. He said awkwardly, "Can I ask you something?" She glanced up, one eyebrow faintly raised. "How did you do that up there?" he asked. "Stay so calm. I mean, with all that, with those snipers raining fire like that. Everyone says they were, unstoppable." She thought back to the valley, to the sound of Rios hitting the snow, to the crushing silence of the jammed radio, to the feel of rock shards cutting her cheek when her optic took the hit. "I wasn't calm," she said. "I was scared same as anyone else." He looked surprised. "Didn't look like it." "It never does when you're too busy to show it," she said. She considered her next words, choosing them carefully. They weren't unbeatable. They just hadn't met anyone willing to climb high enough to see past their angles. He nodded slowly, as if filing the phrase away somewhere he'd revisited in other storms. Outside, the wind roared across the runway. In her mind, she saw the valley again, not filled with gunfire and panic, but empty, sunlit, reverting to what it had been before people decided to turn it into a trap. From an imagined vantage point high on the ridge, she watched the snow slowly reclaim everything. Spent brass disappeared one flake at a time. Boot prints softened and vanished. Bloodstains faded under a fresh crust. Even the outlines of destroyed enemy gear blurred, becoming just another shape in a landscape that would outlast everyone who'd fought over it. The valley would not remember names or call signs. It would not know which side had claimed victory. It would keep its ridges and its funnels and its angles, waiting for whoever came next. She turned away from the window and began quietly cleaning her rifle, fingers steady, motions economical. Loud victories weren't her style. The loud part had happened already, in the crack of distant shots and the shouted commands in a frozen corridor. The part that mattered most to her was this: steel wiped down, glass checked, notes updated, lessons learned. On some future map, another valley would be outlined in red grease pencil. Another patrol would huddle around it, talking about routes and time windows. Maybe one of them would remember a story about a sniper net that was supposed to be unstoppable and a quiet shooter on a ridge who broke it apart. Maybe they'd listen a little closer when someone pointed at a side path and said, "This could be important." That was enough. Out there, under the sun, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering the scars of the day as if they'd never been there.